Okay, friends, I have an incredible story to share with you today. It's a little bit mind-blowing and mind-bending, but in order to get to that point, I want to share with you one quick idea from the parasha. The parasha tells us that there is a type of mitzvah, and the mitzvah is called a chok, and the name of the parasha is chukat. What is a chok? So a chok is unlike two other types of mitzvot, because we have the other mitzvot that are called mishpatim. Mishpatim are laws that we pretty much know the reasons for their rational mitzvot, like do not steal, do not kill, and other such mitzvot. They are rational mitzvot. Another mitzvot are called edut. Edut are called testimonies. And these are like Shabbat and Chagim. And these mitzvot, the rabbis tell us, have a little bit of rationality, but they have certain testimonials. We keep Shabbat as a testimony to HaKadosh Baruch Hu creating the world. We keep Pesach and all the mitzvot of Pesach for the same reason, and for other reasons that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. And then we have a mitzvah that is called a chok. A chok is a mitzvah that has no rationale whatsoever. We do not know the reason for the mitzvah. There is no rational explanation. It defies logics. It is supernatural, is how the rabbis describe it. What exactly are examples of a chok mitzvah, and why are they so important? And the rabbis tell us, like the mitzvah of kasher, kashrut is a chok. We don't know the reason for kasher. You may think you have certain ideas. The rabbis say you don't know. Rashi even tells us it's beyond our mortal understandings to understand the mitzvah of kashrut. Hashem says, do it. It's a gezerah. We keep kasher. Another example is the quintessential mitzvah chok, and that is para aduma, the red heifer. What exactly is this red heifer? It's a red cow, completely red. Rashi says, not even shtei sarot can be shachor. Not even two hairs can be black. Has to be totally red. There are such cows, by the way, here in America, that were transported to Eretz Yisrael. What is this cow used for? Well, in order to be tahor, to be pure, in order to go onto Har Habayit, to go into the Beit HaMikdash or even the mountain today, the main area of it, you need to be tahor because everyone has tumat met. They have an impurity that comes through a dead body, whether being next to it, under the same roof as it. So in order to go into Har Habayit, you need to be tahor. So what do? They would go to an opposite mountain, and they would take this red cow, and it would be killed, and it would be burned, and its ashes would have a vast amount of burnt wood ashes added to it, a vast amount. A lot of pure water was added as well, and a little bit of this special mystical concoction would be sprinkled onto the person who is tameh, impure, and they would become pure. So it's an unusual thing, but what makes it into a chok? There's a big machloket. What makes this unusual procedure of the sprinkling of the ashes of the para aduma, the red cow, so unusual and non-understandable? So the rabbis tell us maybe it's this feature. The person who receives this liquid mixture becomes pure, but the sprinkler, who was pure beforehand, now that they sprinkle the concoction, they become impure, they become tameh. There's this double feature that comes with it. Shlom HaMelech himself, the wisest of all men, said, this eludes me. I do not understand how it can be. And maybe it's this feature that the pure become impure and the impure become pure. So we know that the para aduma, the red cow, that purifies people, has this double impact on the one receiving the liquid and the one who's giving it over. The rabbis learn from this something very, very important. And they see that many times in life, people have to do certain jobs that are difficult. They involve traveling, for example, business and otherwise, or they have to do chesed and mitzvot by traveling as well. I have the zchut this Thursday of doing the mitzvah of kibbud av v'em, which means I have to travel on British Airways, Baruch Hashem, to London. And I'm getting out of my regular environment. I'm going to see things I may not want to see. I'm going to hear things I may not want to hear. But we have a mitzvah to do. And when you travel, you go through certain challenges. I want to share with you an unbelievable story to show you that even though people who may have to travel in order to do certain mitzvot, like collect tzedakah, go through challenges, there's a level of impurity that comes because they have to do something that involves purity. It's still, if the situation creates the scenario, they still have to do this mitzvah. Even though a little bit of impurity comes, they still will be giving purity to other people. There is such a story that I'd heard before, my friends, but I read just yesterday. So now I want to give it over because I wasn't sure about it, but now I read it, corroborated by this particular author who is very trustworthy, and it involves the Steipler Gaon. The Steipler Gaon, the great Steipler, Rav Kanievsky, Rav Chaim's father, and he was a great, great tzaddik who studied tremendous amount and gave many, many brachot to many, many people. And he, or towards the end of his life, it was difficult for him to hear or even to see. However, people had come to visit him. And there's a story of a man who was a Rebbe of Talmidim, of students. And he brought his students to get a little test and a bracha from this great tzaddik, the Steipler. And the story goes that he brought these young students of his to see the Steipler. And he went in, and the Steipler was learning, and I guess he verheard them, he gave little tests to these young boys. Then he gave them a bracha, and they left. And the Rebbe was about to leave, and the Steipler stopped the Rebbe and said, "Come here, take a seat." So he sat down. He said, "What's your name?" He says, "My name is Yankel." And he says, "Doesn't make sense. Your name is Shlomo." I'm like, "What? Your name is Shlomo." He says, No, Rebbe, I don't understand. My name is Yankel. My father is not Shlomo. My brother, there's no one in my mishpacha who is Shlomo." So he said to him, "I see written on your forehead, on your metzach, that your name is Shlomo, is Solomon." Man is like, "Listen, I know the Rebbe is a great tzaddik, but I can tell you right now, I was never named Shlomo. My father's name is not Shlomo. My grandfather is Shlomo. No, my family is Shlomo." So the Steipler had this koach of reading people's faces. It's called chokhmat partzuf, the ability to read a person's face. There's actually a chapter in the Zohar that was once shown to me by a great Mekubal that discusses it. And the Steipler was such a tzaddik, he was able to look at a person's metzach, their forehead, and know about their averot and about their mitzvot. When I see a tzaddik, I walk around like this, and they're able to reveal information. He says, "Your name is Shlomo. It must be." So the man thought, and he says, a story just came to my head from many, many years ago, and it involves the name Shlomo. So some say, "What's the story?" So I'll tell you. Many years ago, I was collecting for tzedakah, and I had to travel to a far-off community. And everyone said you had to sit with the president of the community, and I remember, because they made a big deal, you must call him President Shlomo. President Shlomo. So I went to him and I explained to him what I was collecting for. And in the conversation, I must have said something that offended his ego. And he got very upset with me and he said, "You cannot collect a penny in this community." And he was right. He told the community not to give me a single penny, although I was collecting for a tzedakah in Eretz Yisrael. No matter where I went, everyone said, "President Shlomo says I cannot give you. President Shlomo says I cannot give you." Everyone he went to, garnished. Not a single penny. It's a big problem. I realized after this, because I didn't think I offended him. I said something, maybe he was upset with me, but I didn't realize the punishment would be he wouldn't get a single penny from me for my Mossad in Eretz Yisrael. I went to the next community. And I went to one person and I went to one guy, and he loved what I was saying, and he loved the tzedakah, And he said to me, I'm going to give you $500, which back then, by the way, was a lot of money. It was a big, big contribution. And he gave me a check. Happens to be that this man was a brother-in-law or a cousin of President Shlomo in the other town. And he found out about it, and President Shlomo called this man and said, cancel your check. Don't give him your money. He offended me. No money for this man. Send him away. And the check was canceled, and my heart was broken because I really was tasked with finding parnasah, with finding a donation for this community, for this kollel or whatever it was, my yeshiva, and I couldn't collect anything. It was a terrible, terrible trip. However, I must tell you something. When I got home, I found out that this man, President Shlomo, on the day that that check was canceled, died. I don't know its significance, but I'm telling you, that's what happened. So the Steipler said, aha, it makes sense. This man did a terrible thing to you. He got offended necessarily, and he stopped you taking tzedakah that was already pledged to your name, and he was going to prevent it. Hashem took his life away. But let me tell you, on this particular trip, you were meant to die. There was a gezerah, says the Steipler, that you were meant to die on this particular trip. However, since you were involved in the situation and the money was pledged to you and taken away, President Shlomo's years were added to you instead. Whatever reason Hashem decided he did something bad enough that he deserved to lose his life for whatever reason, and his remaining years became your remaining years instead. And that's why in this world you may be uncle, but in Shemayim you are walking around with the remaining years of Shlomo. And that's why I read in your forehead that actually your name is Shlomo, because you're continuing the remaining years of this President Shlomo in that community. You know, I'd heard this story, but until I read it yesterday, I was scared to give it over because it's a very, very powerful and in some ways frightening story. I must tell you that related to this, we say at the end of the Shemona Esrei, Pesukim that relate to our name, or names. If you already haven't taken on this minhag, you should. The Chavetz Chaim brings it down, and the Meforshim bring it down, and you'll see at the end of most Sidurim, that are worth being Sidurim, by the way, it will give you Pesukim that begin with a certain letter and end with a certain letter of your name. And then it will tell you a pasuk that is keneged, that relates to that particular name of yours, and it begins with the first letter of your name and ends with the first letter. So you have the same pasuk. You've seen this, right? And we say this pasuk right before we take 3 steps. By the way, as a side point, it is at that point you should also make any personal tefillot that you have should be made for your own needs. The Shulchan Aruch says, Rav Yosef Karo, you should make your personal petitions at that point as well. You say the Pesukim, if you have one name or 2 names, that Pasuk that begins and ends with the first and last letter of your name, say it then, and then you should make any personal requests of a Kadosh Baruch Hu at that point. But what exactly are we doing at that point? So the Chavetz Chaim, I read this, I think in the Chavetz Chaim, or Shmeret HaLashon, one of his Sefarim, he says it's all to do with Lashon Hara. Because when a person leaves this world, they have trouble remembering their own name. Why would a person have trouble remembering their own name? What does that come from? You've been called that name your entire life. What exactly is the trouble you have from remembering your own name? So he says it comes from the Avera of Lashon Hara. You see, every time, Lo Aleinu, you say Lashon Hara about someone else, their Averot become your Averot. You actually load up with their sins. And their name becomes your name. Now, you can imagine, lo aleinu, a person unfortunately says Lashon Hara many times. Don't worry, you could do teshuvah for it as well, right? When you say the Ana Hashem, you're actually saying teshuvah for it. If not, when you go through tzarot and challenges, difficulties, it's also machaper. But that aside, you still forget what your name is. Why? Because you've got all these different names. All these persons' averot come to you, and you lose your averot every time a person speaks Lashon Hara about you. So you should be machaper in your mind or heart, right? Like we say in Kriya Shema Alamita, on your bedtime Shema, take away, I'm mochel whoever did this to me. It's a good thing to do, right? Because it's midah keneged midah. You forgive them, and Hashem will forgive you as well. But either way, when you get to the next world, you have all these names, right? Loaded up. Because lo aleinu, unfortunately, we speak Lashon Hara. So all these names have now been passed on to us. So the Chafetz Chaim says, at least you'll remember these 2 or 3, 1, 2, 3 Pesukim that begin and end with the first letter of your name. And that's going to be your way to remember what your actual name is. That's going to be that's going to be the mechanism when you move on to the next world and they ask, is this your name? You're going to be able to say, yes, because these are Pesukim that remind me, and those names, leave them off. Take them away from my cheshbon. I don't want these names related to my name in any way, shape, or form. Baruch Hashem. And so these names are forgotten, and Baruch Hashem, we are able to keep our own names. I mentioned in relation to the parasha because sometimes we go places which are outside of our comfort zone, and we say things and we see things, and it's tough. It's very, very tough when you're outside of your, natural environment, because we live in a pretty narrow corridor, do we not? Yeah, we go Bet Knesset, we go home, right? We go maybe somewhere on Shabbat to visit, but besides that, we're living in a certain Daled Amot, right? A certain bubble that we live in. And that's a good thing to do. But sometimes you have to go to places and we see things. It's important at those times to remember who we are and what our name is. Just like some people leave and get Tumah Met, right? And they have to go outside Har HaBayit in order to get Torah, right? In order to keep the purity. And then they come back home. They come back to Har HaBayit as pure people. It's important when we travel, and we're doing a lot of, it's the summer now, people are traveling, and I say this, and I try to do it myself, and I'm able to always carry a sefer. Carry a holy book with you. Now, for many people that constitutes tefillin when you travel, they carry a book. Okay, so if, for example, you do the Daf Yomi, try to carry the book with you. By the way, in addition, when you sit on the plane, right, I have a 6-7 hour flight, at least for 45 minutes, 1 hour, you have a sefer open many, many times. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to pretend that I sit there the entire time studying. I'm sure that's tzaddikim that do. At least for 1 hour on the flight, you have a sefer that is open in front of you. Just having it open, even don't read it, just have it open in front of you. I've had many, many people come up to me and say to me, what are you reading? What is that? I was taking a flight. I was coming back from, I think, Florida. And I was sitting next to a man who did not have kippah, there's no way of knowing he was Jewish. And he's sitting next to me, and I had my Gemara open to me. And he says to me, what's that book? And I said, it's called the Talmud. He goes, oh, right, the Gemara, right? I said, yes. Are you Jewish? Obviously he is. He's coming back from Florida to New York. And we got a whole discussion with this gentleman about what the daf happened to be that day. It happened to be talking, that particular Gemara in Baba Kama. We're going back 2 Gemara, we're in Baba Batra. This is before Baba Metzia. And I was going through Baba Kama, and I was reading through it, and I said, it's all about the laws of inheritance. And I explained to him what the daf was speaking about. Baruch Hashem, it was in English over there, and I showed it to him, and we had this very interesting conversation. And he said, I don't think, he said to me, I've ever looked in a Gemara before. But he said, I must tell you, this trip I just took to Florida was a very awkward and uncomfortable trip. We were going back because my father had died and he left an inheritance, and we were getting into a machlok, he didn't say that, an argument about the laws of inheritance. Because my father left us a certain amount of money and some properties, and we're going to have to go down. And it makes me feel good, because we came to a certain agreement, but it was very uncomfortable, that even Judaism discusses it, and that's the exact page that was open in front of him as he's sitting. This is a true story. My wife was to the left of me, right? Actually, I was sitting in her seat, we switched seats. And he said, it's unbelievable. I can't believe it. Maybe there's something to this whole Talmud Gemara thing that it discusses it. By the way, the Gemara says it's very important, and the Mefarshim say, try very hard not to argue over Yerusha, not to argue over inheritance. As some pointed out to me, when a poor person dies, the descendants don't argue too much. What's there to argue over, right? Shoelaces, you know what I'm saying? A little bit of clothing. But unfortunately, when a rich person dies, this person spent their entire life working hard, and they leave this world, and suddenly these kids come, and the grandkids come, and suddenly relatives start coming out of the closet. You know, as I always say, where there's a will, there's a relative. Right? Suddenly, all the machloket comes out, lo aleinu. This is not what the father wants. It's not what the grandfather wants. We try to find peshara, and if it means losing a little bit of money in order to keep shalom, in order to keep peace, it's very important. That's what Gemara is saying. And this man, because of this, we stayed in contact afterwards, actually. There's another interesting story about his daughter and a certain connection that we had, mysteriously, which is still in place, so I can't speak about it, Baruch Hashem. But it's all min hashamayim. This would never have happened had I not had the... and I didn't want to do it, I'll be honest with you. You're on a plane, you want to sleep and hang out and see these garbage movies. I said, let me give 1 hour with the Gemara, open a conversation, and at that moment, Baruch Hashem, I was able to have this discussion and show this person the amitut, the truth of Torah, and the applicability to his exact situation on that very day, Baruch Hashem. Wishing you all a Chodesh Tov, and may we all be successful in all our travels, B'ezrat Hashem. Chazak HaBaruch.